Hello everyone. First of all, I want to thank the session organizers, Professor Mario Gianpietro, and also the organizers of this meeting on postnormal science to let me to present here some results of the recent research we are developing in our group. So I will talk about the EU Green Deal and the question that it's currently being discussed about what are the implications of the EU Green Deal, and if particularly if it is a step forward for business as usual. So this presentation is a joint work of Research and So, Jordi Villardell and myself. So I will start to making the first question, which is the EU Green Deal is a great opportunity for greening the EU economy, or it is a great greenwashing exercise for preserving the status quo. So to keeping the things like had been in the past without any fundamental changes. And let me to present that narrative posing an ancient sutra, Buddhist sutra, that it says that as the ignorant grasp the fingertip and not the moon, which is the fingertip is pointing to the moon, so those who cling to the letter, so cling to the only to the fingertip, don't know the truth. More simple, it can be just say that when the finger is pointing to the moon, if we just the ignorant is only keeping looking at the finger and not to the direction that points to the moon, so is not able to see the moon, the final aim. So, keeping that image in mind, we could start to analyze, to make a quick analyze about the EU Green Deal. The EU Green Deal is a methodology. It's a method, it's a set of tools to achieve an aim. So EU has presented that plan at the end of last year to achieve a decarbonized economy for 2050. And they just aim to do that changing, turning climate and environmental challenges into EU opportunities, and at the same time making the transition just, so socially equitative and inclusive. They design and outlined some key investments which are needed for making that transition to a zero carbon economy. So they plan concrete policies and legislative measures at EU level to shape an integrated system energy and circular economy, and aims to make more efficient the European economy. So they plan to use renewable and low carbon fuels, including hydrogen, and that hydrogen economy will be used where the applications for heating and are not able to be electrified. So, what are the aims of that policies and that plan in the EU Green Deal? So the aims, the moon, so where are they pointing to, are focused mainly in climate neutral economy for Europe. That means zero emissions in 2050. They plan to make that through a circular economy, changing and building renovation, reducing almost to zero the pollution, looking at treating and addressing the ecosystems and biodiversity losses, then designing a special strategy for greening the agriculture system, and reducing at the same time the use of chemical pesticides and fertilizers and antibiotics in the agriculture system for Europe, and they call that strategy from farm to fork. they want to also, the European Commission wants to also address the problem of the transport. So transport is one of the most emitters economic sectors, and they plan to go for zero CO2 emissions per kilometer by 2030. Added to that, they aim to make EU diplomatic efforts to mobilize support for the EU Green Deal outside the frontiers of the EU. So more concrete, what they plan to invest initially is 1 trillion euros for the decade that goes from 2021 to 2030. That is split into 5 main lines of investment, which are 47%, which is around 500 billion, going from EU budget to various funds, which will go rural development, regional development, and Horizon Europe and LIFE programs. 26% will go to public-private investments guaranteed by InvestEU. 13% will be co-financed by the EU, the states, InvestEU, and the European Investment Bank. 11% will come from the EU states, and 2.3%, 25 billion, will come from the carbon emissions market. That is the full investment that 1 trillion euros, which will be 1 billion per year, will come from that 5 points I have mentioned. The European Commission is also planning an additional 1.6 trillion to end up with a total of 2.6 trillion for the whole decade. That 2.6 trillion will means 260 billion per year that European Commission hopes to mobilize from the public budget, from states and other administrations. So if it is approved, that public part will cover only about 90 million, and that 90 million it's expected that will mobilize the rest of the investment needed that will come from private investors, that it is remaining 170 billion it's needed to mobilize that 260 billion euros per year. So we need to contrast that, to compare that from other sources. So that is what it's European Commission planning to do in the next years, and what is the necessary funding and investment needed coming from other estimations. So at the global level, the estimations from IPCC, they say that we will need globally to mobilize 2.53% of the global GDP. Taking that global figures, if we just estimate what it will mean for EU, we estimate that investment needed for the EU, the whole EU, will mean 342 billion euros per year for the EU, which is different from what it's European Commission planning to invest in that period. So the European Green Deal seeks to mobilize 260 billion per year, while it is 80 billion less than it's advised by the IPCC to achieve a zero carbon economy. So that it's 80 billion less, and mostly the great part of that it's coming from private investors. So the direct investment of the public system proposed by the European Commission is around 90 billion per year. It's in a total of 1 trillion euros by that period, which is only 29% of what science, what IPCC considers necessary. Let's look for more data. In the European Horizon 2020 European project MEDEAS, we make a model that makes some estimations about what will be the amount of resources and the money, the investments necessary to decarbonize the economy. Here I am showing you some four figures about some of the variables that the PyMEDEAS model, which is open source and Python program, it's telling us that projections how the system will evolve in different strategies, in different scenarios. So the red line, it's the business as usual strategy. So that scenario, it's considering extrapolating current trends. That means if we just continue making the things as we did in the past, what we will end up it's with rise of temperature crossing the limit of the 2 degrees Celsius. And same thing happens with the emissions. That it's because the emissions continue to grow year by year in the world. And just joined to that growing emissions, it's associated to also what happens with the GDP. Due to the resources depletion in the business as usual scenario, we will just the model is projecting that at the end of the 2030, the economy will start to make changes, to slow down, and keeping just slowing in the whole period till 2050. The other two scenarios that we consider are what we call optimal level transition, OLT, which is we increase the emissions in a reasonable, let's say, moderate way to try to achieve the decarbonization. In that case, we will keep the temperature globally below the 2 degrees, but higher than the 1.5 degrees, and the GDP will continue to grow, but more slowly at the end of the period, just going to the 2050. And the emissions will drop, as we see in the blue line in the figure of the CO2 equivalent emissions in the world. In compared to the business as usual, then we have more electrification of the society, so because we have more renewable energy sources penetration, and so the economy and the system, it behaves more greener than the business as usual, as it is expected. Then if we are more ambitious and we just plan a huge effort in implementing renewable energy sources, which is the green line, which is called the transition scenario, transit scenario, then we can achieve the goal of just making the temperature increasing lower than the other two. Also, the CO2 emissions will drop, and also the GDP will keep a moderate also growth beyond the 2040, and then keep stabilized. As we see in the last figure, in the total energy generation, the electrification will also dramatically grow, and then it will stabilize at the 2050. That gives us a figure of investments needed of the 5% of the global economy must be devoted to the energy transition. Compared to that, other estimations like Jacobson Abdelotti and Scuridis and Bardi, they estimate that it's needed for making that renewable transition around the 4% of the global economy. which is higher of what has been previously explained of the IPCC estimations, which they were 2.53%. So if we will look at that numbers, at the figures, we will see that the EU initial estimations for planning investments and mobilizing private sector investments, it's lower compared from the IPCC, but it's very low compared to the other estimations, which are higher than that. Let's to end up with that short review, go to the transport. What happens with the transport? We make an analysis on that which has been published recently, that June, just to make some calculations about what will be the cost and the resources necessary to just shift all the fleet, the transport fleet that we have in Europe, to transport that is 100% renewable. So, and that in that study, we just posed two scenarios, which are different from the Medeas one, what I already showed to you. The first one is the baseline, that is substitute our vehicles by electric ones, just keeping as far as possible the transport modes, so non-shifting transport modes from cars to trains or so on. And the other one that proposed, that it's called rail, that it propose a shift from land transport, cars, trucks and so on, and make that transport by substitute by railways. So the new transport system will require 16% less energy than in 2016, with a 70% reduction in road transport. If you want to keep the volume of the sea and air transport that we already have, then that would involve an increase in energy consumption of that sectors, air and sea, of 162% and 149% for these modes, respectively. In the old rail scenario, which is land transport based on electric trains, there will be a 29% reduction in energy consumption. But then the figure from that is that we need only to replace the fleet between 2.3 and 2.7% of the EU's GDP over the next 30 years. So that extra investment that we need, it's only to replace the fleet. We don't say anything about the energy that will provide the electricity that will need that fleet to run. Okay. So the conclusions. The conclusions are that although the finger is pointing to the right direction, so that means that it's just planning the new Green Deal, it's providing are good. They're based on the calculations and the analysis that are already shown. They are not the most suitable for the big challenges we will face. The second conclusion is that maybe we should be more humble and try to build up new strategies with new tools and forget about the business as usual reformulations. And as an example, how we think about sustainability in a growing economy system. Something that needs to be sustained, but opposed to the growing economic system. Then focus instead of in the money, focus in the material resource, and particularly on material resource limits. So to achieve the moon, we need to consider the path to the moon. We need to consider the material resources that we need to mobilize to transform the economy. And that it's necessary, instead of trying to square the circle, that means that trying to transition from a linear economy to to a circular one, but without fundamental changes in our system. So if we want a truly circular economy, that means a sustainable economy, but truly sustainable, that with high amount of recycle rates and just reducing the pollution and all the negative effects that will have the socioeconomic activities on the ecosystems, we need to rethink everything. So to do that, we need to focus on resilience, which is we need to design a system that must be resilient, so it will just adapt to the different issues that could happen in the future during the transition to a new socioeconomy, which will be zero carbon and non-damaging the ecosystems, resilient to pandemics and the other ecosystem degradation issues that we have as a result of the past economic activities. And also, and more important, resilient to unexpected threats, the future threats that the climate crisis and the environmental degradation could pose to the society. So thank you very much.